All right, we are still waiting for a few people to get on, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to first welcome everybody to Locating and Catching Northern Smallmouth Bass with myself, Josh Douglas, and good friend, Bassmaster Elite Series rookie, Seth Feider.
What's up, everybody?
We appreciate everybody coming on. This is our second webinar. We're going to keep these coming now in as close to a monthly arrangement as we can. Our next one will be on locating hard bottom, and we'll get into some more of that here in a little bit. We urge everybody during this webinar to ask questions. You can see here on the screenshot below, if you're on your laptop or computer, you can ask questions here on the right-hand side by following the arrow. And if you're on your mobile device, you can also get them up in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see the question mark. We're going to be giving away some pretty sweet prizes for those for just coming on today. We're going to give two away. Some of our sponsors and other companies got behind it, and they want to put in a few donations. So we're going to give away one prize pack for the just a random question. Like I said, we're urging everyone to ask questions, and another prize pack just for attending today. And we'll get those out on social media or whatever and let everyone know who won. We'd like to thank Pelican Boxes, BioVex, Rapala, and Outcast Tackle for their support. And then I'd also like to give a big thank you to the companies that support Seth and I's webinar, whether in the way of media and getting it out there for everyone to know about it. That'd be North American Fisherman, Bass East, Dr. Sonar, and Classic Bass. Some of the webinar topics we're going to talk about today would be standard tools and settings, anything that have to go with smallmouth bass. Both Seth and I spend a lot of time on the water chasing these brown fish, and there's some pretty nice things out there that we feel like people should have in different settings. We're not going to get too much into settings in this webinar. But one in particular we're going to get into. And then once we start, we'll take it to the water. We're going to get into some pre-spawn jerkbait bite, a hair jig deal, bed fishing, deep water structure fishing, and then the shallow summer bite once things start to warm up. Our first area of business, we're talking on topic of something that we feel everyone should have on their boat. I know I would feel naked without my hydro wave when I'm out fishing for smallies. The hydro wave is a sound simulator that stimulates the environment in which you're fishing. Definitely gets a knee-jerk reaction from bass, and if anyone is more feisty out there and respond to the hydro wave better, it's a smallmouth bass.
Yeah, killer tool for smallmouths.
Hydro wave, like I said, stimulates the environment around you. You can see in this screenshot here, just fishing a point. The hydro wave a lot of times will give me a good bottom separation. It'll make the fish, I'll be able to see them. They hear that kind of noise and they react to it pretty quickly. Like I've always said, if I can see a fish, I feel like I can catch it, and there's no difference when I'm looking at my sonar. And the hydro wave definitely gives me a better environment to fish in. Bottom separation is also hugely important, especially when we're talking about smallmouth bass. Smallies have the tendency to, they love rocks. They're going to hang around big boulders. That's what they do. As you can see on this screenshot right here, it's showing the bottom. It's showing how hard of a bottom it is that we're fishing. And right there with the arrow pointing, that's an actual smallmouth bass. You can see the little bit of separation I have between that and the boulder. And this is something I've seen firsthand. Hydro wave will literally make them raise up right in front of me. I'm not even moving. I'm looking down, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a blimp underneath me. And all that is a fish separating itself from the rocks. Hugely important for us when we're going around these reefs, especially in the summertime when we start trying to look on our graphs to actually find these fish and catch each individual one. Everyone who knows me or follows me on social media knows I'm a screenshot geek when it comes to my Lowrance electronics. I get into it. It's something that I enjoy sharing. This one in particular is one that I like a lot. Up here, Seth actually pointed it out last year when we were fishing that there's always seems to be a loon around us whenever it's like textbook. We're out fishing with the hydro wave on, and these loons, our state bird in Minnesota, they get very, very curious to pop up on each side of the trolling motor. And in this particular instance, this one just happened to pop up on my left, pop up on my right, and then went underneath my trolling motor perfectly. and that's the screenshot of it. You can see some of the harder bottom areas up on top where it actually hit the fish, and the rest, all that haziness underneath it is just turbulence from the fish swimming, similar to the stuff you see on top of the screen.
Yeah, and that actually shows you how far away sound travels underwater, because it seems like anywhere you pull up, and if you look out, you pull up to a spot, drop your trolling motor, start fishing. If there's a loon 200-300 yards away, you'll look away for a couple minutes fishing, look back, and the thing will be sitting 10 yards away from your boat. So it really goes to show you how far they can actually hear that underwater.
No doubt. We all claim ourselves to be pretty good fishermen, but I guarantee you there's not a better fisherman than the loon out there, and they know when things are feeding, when there's stuff around, and they want to get in on it. Another thing both Seth and I both started using this past year is the R2 Marine Innovations Eliminator prop nut. This thing's pretty sweet. It balances out the trolling motor a little bit. There's a lot of, and the actual motor itself is real heavy, but around the prop area it's relatively light. Gives every trolling motor a little bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it a wobble, but this helps balance it out. Less vibration in the water. Looks cool. It's nice to be able to take on and off. But one thing we'll be talking about in this webinar, going over fishing for smallmouth, as close smallmouths are notorious, they will eat. These fish will eat, except for they do get boat shy very quick. And if they know you're around, it can be a whole new ball game. If you can get stealthy and get as close to them as possible, you're gonna have far more success rates. And the prop nut definitely, I feel so far, has been giving me that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely early in the spring or anytime the smallmouths are real shallow. We're generally fishing real clear water. These fish are super spooky, so any little edge you can have getting in there a little quieter up on them is gonna end up putting more fish in your boat.
This is going to be a shameless plug here on my part, but definitely one of the more important ones. I am one of the owners, along with Andy Young, of Tonka Customs. We make a wave tamer deck mount. We fish a lot of real big water up here up north, Erie, Mille Lacs, even our home lake, which it's made after Minnetonka, can get rough and tough sometimes. I got really sick of my ram mounts or other kind of mounts falling down or me not being able to see over it when I'm running rivers, and we came up with this concept. They're pretty sweet. Seth Feider here, he's on the pro team, been rocking it for the last couple of years, and we urge you to check them out. You can check them out at tonkacustoms.com. These things are Champlain tough. We have put them to the test. The graph stays right there. It doesn't move and stays out of your vision in the perfect spot for you to actually, well, even while you're on the deck of the boat fishing. So check them out. I'd like to thank Lowrance. A lot of my screenshots, or all my screenshots, are going to come through my Lowrance unit. The one setting I really wanted to discuss, and this is one that I got a lot of questions about in my electronics training, and then after our last webinar, was frequency settings. This is a kind of a big deal, and this goes towards structure scan with Lowrance. I do use 455 a lot. You'll see in this screenshot I was originally set on 455, and then I turned it to 800. 800 gives me more of a high def look, but it doesn't shoot nearly off to the side. You can see you start losing it already at about 40 feet. However, we're only in 10 feet of water. If I was in 30, 40 feet of water, this would be definitely my better choice. I'd have a lot more space in between me and the bottom of the lake, and the 800 setting would be ideal. So places like Lake Erie, sometimes Oneida, some of those fisheries that you're out fishing deeper water, that 800 comes in real nice. For the majority of part, for fishing like shallow reef lakes like Mille Lacs and Green Lake, or looking for hard bottom areas in places like Lake Minnetonka around grass, that 455 kilohertz is by far my better choice. I can see further, and that's the setting you want to use if you're 25 feet or less. We're going to get into the pre-spawn jerkbait bite. Guarantee you it's both one of Seth and I's favorite bites out there. I'll let Seth kind of break some of this down for you.
Yeah, by far one of my favorite ways to get on smallmouth. Killer early in the spring, and actually really good search bait all year long for smallmouth. Just the erraticness of it. They're super curious by nature. Cover a ton of water with it. Really erratic, gets their attention. They can see it from a long ways off, and just a blast to catch them on it. I mean, they just rip the rod out of your hand when they grab it. But a few things I'm going to look for early spring. This is kind of, this will play a lot too, like later in the summer, but early spring, right after the ice comes off the lakes, water's still cold. These fish are kind of almost still in their wintering patterns. And then again, after they spawn, like the hottest part of the summer, the sharpest break you can find in these lakes we'll almost always have smallmouth on it unless you're fishing like a canyon type lake where everything's a real steep break. But any of these lakes, a lot of these big lakes we fish for smallmouth are relatively flat. Erie and Mille Lacs and stuff like that. Relatively flat for the size they are. A few things I look for though in the sharp breaks. One's going to be the beginning and ends of them, where you're coming off a slower taper right where it starts a fast taper. Another thing's going to be irregularities, little points, little turns in them. And the third one, this one's kind of usually the most key in like the real cold time of the year, and then the real hot time of the year is like the steepest little stretch of that steep break you find. It might be 10 yards long, it might be 50 yards long, but the more vertical it is, just a really good place for them to set up in real hot and real cold water. They can go up and down easy. They can go up, slide up to 10 feet of water if they want. They can pull back out into 40 feet of water if they want. Just prime feeding areas, and just now that I've been traveling around more and more, it's definitely a pattern that plays throughout the country. Another area I really like to look for are these large shallow flats that come way out into the lake. They're great areas for fish to stage on and spawn on. And you know they're going to be hard bottom. You can look at your Navionics map and you see straight lines running down the bank. You know it's probably not going to be hard. And then you have this big flat point that comes out with little high spots on it. Generally going to be rock or harder bottom on your lakes. Great places to look. The tips of them are always great, and then little high spots on top of them are going to draw fish. Anywhere, this is going to be another reoccurring theme in these flat lakes that we fish. A lot of these fish are going to be relating to little tiny, like 2-3 foot rises and drops in the bottom, almost little ridges they kind of follow. Definitely something you want to look for on your graph and pay attention to while you're fishing. You can see a lot of them on the Navionics maps, but and we could just get on top of these and fan cast with a jerkbait, cover a lot of water. I mean, smallmouths are aggressive and curious, and if you get around them, you're going to start catching them. And then cover the water with the jerkbait, and then sit there and maybe fish a little slower and catch everything you can when you get on them. I do all my jerkbait fishing primarily with a bait caster. He's a 7-foot medium moderate. Daiwa Tatula rod with a zillion reel, and use 10-pound fluorocarbon for almost all of my jerking. I'll go down to 8, maybe up to 12, 15. Realistically, I'm only doing that to change the depth of my jerkbaits running. If I go a little lighter, I can get another foot or two out of it, or if I want to keep it up a little shallower, I can go heavier pound test and keep it up a little bit. And I do pretty much almost all my jerkbait fishing with it's a new bait by Rapala called the Shadow Rap. It's a killer jerkbait. It's got 3 hooks on it, which is real important when you're smallmouth fishing. They like to come up and slap at it. The more hooks you got in there, the better chance you got getting hooks in them and landing them. And that moderate action is real important in the rod too. You want a lot of give. You don't need to be super hard and sensitive to detect the bite. I mean, basically, a bite on a jerkbait, you're going to go to twitch it, and your rod's going to double over, or you'll be sitting there paused, and one will just like take off running with it. So, like I said, I use a real soft rod that's just for landing the fish with them real light hooks. And the other scenario that plays out, and I like it a lot in the summer, is a little number 8 X-Wrap. I throw it on a spinning rod, 8-pound fluorocarbon. Throw on a Daiwa Ballistic 3000, cast them quite a ways with a Daiwa 7-foot medium action spinning rod. Like I said, this is real erratic. I like to target cast this in the summer, or any places you go where maybe a big fish is a 2.5, 3-pounder, even 2-pounder. Some of the rivers we go to, they don't have a lot of big fish. And that little number 8 X-Wrap will get bit wherever you go. It's a great bait to get bit on. A lot of numbers. And that's what I do. basically if I'm fishing around small fish. The rest of the year I'm throwing that shadow rat pretty much exclusively. It's a real great year-round jerkbait. I can fish it real cold water all the way up to middle of summer.
Now we're going to take you into bed fishing. This is usually what follows after the pre-spawn jerkbait bite. This is what they're leading their way to. They're getting around those same reefs Seth was pointing out before. And these fish sometimes will stay there all year long, but they're going to hang out there because those are the areas that they want to spawn on. It's got the right kind of rock, the right kind of boulders, different mix, and it's also the supper table, if you will, for them to eat. Bed fishing is probably one of my favorite ways to fish, both largemouth and smallmouth. When you're looking for smallies early in the season, I tend to look for the same type of bays. If it's a notorious smallmouth lake, I'm going to tend to look for the same type of bays that I would look in to find largemouth. These are your sheltered coves. If you got them on the north side of the lake, that's always going to be good right away, protected from the north wind. Anything really that gets protected from that cold water. In this instance, you can see here, it's a big protected cove. It's got a lot of good smallie habitat out in front of it. And on this particular reef-style glacier lake, you know you're going to be able to find the right kind of stuff. Basically, anywhere you go, you just might have to search it out a little bit more in some of these shallower flats. Especially when you're talking about smallmouth, you're going to want to find that nice mix of gravel, boulders, and some sand. They really like that. Anywhere like docks and stuff like that where they can get on and spawn. And these are the type of areas you're going to find in your protected bays. Basically, as soon as the water temp starts to warm up, even in the high 50s, I'll start hitting these bays, start getting in the back of them and looking around for beds. Main lake spawners, this is probably my favorite one to look for when I'm looking on these types of lakes for smallmouth bass. A lot of people skip over them, don't look for them. There's plenty of them. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think the majority of the population of them are going to spawn out on the main lake still. When I look for this, I'm going to look for big contours, a lot of change. Obviously, I need some shallow water, but I want to find stuff that's protected by the wind. These would be like points and reefs, and in this particular, islands are great. Anything that's going to have hard bottom around, it's going to have their kind of habitat. And in this particular picture, you could see if we had a strong north wind, I still have a lot of real good stuff that's protected. If it's coming in from that north, that's all protective. East, you can get behind some stuff still. So basically, there's only one direction that's really going to kind of screw up the area and make it real dirty. And that's good. And even at that case, I can always jump on the backside and fish for them and still be able to catch fish anytime during the season.
Another thing too, those bays and stuff are real good spots to look when that spawn's just starting. Where that main lake is something you want to look at, you know, maybe after some fish have been spawning in them coves already. It's getting a little later in the spring. I mean, definitely those little protected coves and canals and stuff are where your fish are going to spawn first. So, that's usually where I start and then work my way out towards the main lake stuff as the spawn progresses.
Absolutely. And even up here, I mean, I can remember a month ago being in some of those bays and on some of these types of lakes catching smallmouth that were bedding back there. And now some of the main lake stuff is just starting to get going or is in its prime. So there can be a big change there, but those little bays tend to stay a little more neutral than your main lake will. Your main lake can get a little volatile and push them back again. Here's a picture. This is a GoPro picture Seth and I took the other day while we were out getting some screenshots. This is a traditional smallmouth bed. First thing you're going to have for any sight fisherman doing this is a good set of glasses. We both use amphibias. Amphibias are great. I mean, they float and stuff. I got sick of losing glasses, but most importantly, I can just see really good in the water with them. What you're going to look for is some shiny spots, and there tends to be a boulder and a dark spot right in that area. And those shiny spots, you get the right kind of sun. You get that sun behind you where you can actually sit there and get the boat to even kind of glassing it out a little bit more, and they'll start popping at you from a lot further away. Once you start getting dialed in, you can kind of just start pitching your baits to areas where you think there'd be a bed. You don't have to actually see them. This will kind of glow back at you. In other cases, you got to get up on top of them, depending on water clarity, and actually sight fish for them. If you look here, they're not the easiest in the world to see. I can't tell you how many times I've said, is there a smallmouth on that bed? I don't think there's a smallmouth on that bed, and then drop my drop shot down there, and boom, there was a smallmouth on the bed. They tend to sit in a little kind of dark spot next to the light spot, and you can see right here, the arrow's pointing to that dark spot right there, and that's a smallmouth. He was definitely on the bed, and after dropping my Biovex colt tail and a drop shot down, I got him. And that's pretty much what it is to it. I'd say my favorite, hands down, my favorite bait to use is going to be, or my favorite presentation is going to be a drop shot. When it comes to these fish, tubes work just fine. Paddle tails are good. They're chasing away perch, they're chasing away bluegill, whatever it is that they got around. They're constantly chasing around, but they definitely don't stand for any kind of minnow bait, and they'll eat that thing. And smaller the bait, the better. I like to have all hook right there, so they just take it, and I got them right away. The setup that I'm using, I custom build my rods. It's something I got into this year. I'm using an MHX high module drop shot 822 rod. It's a perfect rod. It's got the perfect balance. Customizing it, I kind of got a few more things out of it than I could out of mass manufactured rods. My reel is a Daiwa Steez 3012. This thing's got a bad drag system on this thing. It's perfect for fishing for smallmouth. And then I'm using 10-pound Daiwa J braid to a Daiwa Steez 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And a Biovex colt tail is my favorite in this particular color. It's IU. I will go to a green pumpkin or something, but I really like that IU. Similar to when bed fishing for largemouth, I like a bright color, something that I can irritate the fish. Largemouth, sometimes you got to irritate them a lot more actually, to get them to bite than you do a smallmouth. Smallmouth, if you just kind of get away from them just a little bit, they tend to want to eat it pretty quick. And that IU color on that colt tail, one, it mimics the bait fish perfectly, and I can see it from a long distance away. And I don't necessarily have to see the fish, but I can see when I can't see my bait anymore, and then I know to set the hook. So that's my traditional setup that I'm going to use. If this doesn't work, I might flip over to a paddle tail or put a paddle tail on that drop shot or just a tube. But 90% of the time, a drop shot will get her done. What you say, Seth?
Yeah, that's by far my favorite way to bed fish for smallies. And another thing, a lot of times they'll be real camouflage and real tough to see, but luckily for us, they're typically super aggressive on a bed. So when I go around looking for them, rather than getting right on them, make sure there's a fish on and fish it, I'll just keep cruising along and pitching that drop shot to everything that looks like it might be a bed. Because like I said, they get real camouflage sometimes and you can't see them down there. So every time I see something that looks like a bed, I'm going to make one pitch to it with a drop shot. 9 times out of 10, that's all it takes to catch a smallmouth off the bed, unless he's been messed with a bunch. So just a good little tip. Don't always think you're going to be able to see him, is all I'm saying.
And you don't need to. And just the other day when I was out bed fishing, the guy I was with actually couldn't believe how many times the fish almost turned chameleon on him right in front of him. It'd blend in like black to the bottom. You couldn't see it, and then it separated and it was kind of sandy color. It's amazing how they can do that. So once you learn to actually find their bed or what it is, the type of stuff they're going to want, you'll be 10 times more successful. Hair jigging. This is a great technique, a technique that Seth taught me a couple years back. Excellent way to move water. I'll turn it over to Seth to break it down for you.
Yep. Hair jigging, something we started doing a few years ago. Kind of got taught to me by some Canadian guys. Anytime you add clear water and smallmouths, it's a really killer way to catch them. There's a couple ways we fish it. Mostly in tournaments, we end up casting them, and I'll get into the gear. The gear is super important to be able to cast these. This is a 3/32 ounce jig with some marabou on it, and that's basically all you're throwing. And the other thing we do is what I like to do a lot is actually tow them or troll them. Basically, you're going to run your speed on your troll more constant. You want to go into the wind. That just helps you control your speed a lot better. And I'm going basically a mile an hour. Great way to cover water on all these big reefs and flats and points for smallmouth. And that's really the name of the game in finding them. A lot of these structures on these really big lakes are expansive, you know. A point on a little lake or something, you know, you might be able to cover in a couple casts, but a point on Lake Erie might be 2 miles long. So Covering water is the name of the game for smallmouth. So like I said, I like to troll them a lot. It's a great way to cover water, find out where the fish are, how big they are, and just keep moving along. But this goes back to doing the homework on the Navionics maps. A couple key areas for sure all year long for smallmouth is going to be points and humps, especially little high spots. Typically going to be hard bottom almost everywhere you can go. You can just look at the map and kind of pick out where the rocks are going to be on here just by looking at the contours. Like I said, high spots and points generally going to be hard bottom. Great ambush places for smallmouths to get on and feed, and that's stuff I'm going to look for with the hair jig. And this is a fairly shallow technique. Depending on water clarity, I really don't catch them much past 15 feet. This jig is never on the bottom. You're swimming it back or trolling it back. It may be down 4 or 5 feet or so, but if you have the right water clarity, fish are going to come up and find it. Another thing, like I said earlier, these depth changes. This is funny. I actually took this screenshot before we did this webinar, and I went right back to the spot on the Navionics map and caught fish here, so I know it's a good spot. But those quick little depth changes, like I said before, it might be 2-3 foot, quick little rise. Those fish will hold right on that edge of that break, and they'll use it to move back and forth on a piece of structure. So it's really key area to fish. I mean, if I see that on like a little hump or something, that's definitely the first spot I'm pulling up on. Yeah, I'm going back to regular hard bombs. These are these little rises and drops I'm talking about. Real subtle stuff, but a lot of these real flat lakes, those are really, really key areas to find smallmouths on. And this is towing right here, trolling a hair jig, whatever you want to call it. And just show you how I would cover the water. We got this is the same screenshot. We got about 5 humps out here, and how I would run the bait with the wind, especially early in the spring or even anytime you're in clear water. Wind's going to be your friend. It's going to pool up warmer water in areas and just make stuff a little less visible for the smallmouth. They have such good eyesight. The water's so clear. Anytime you can take advantage of a little bit less visibility is going to be a key deal for you, whether it's waves or dirty water from wind or low light, sun up, sun down, overcast. Any advantage you can get over them in this gin clear water is going to be a big deal. But basically, I'm searching for fish right now. Never been to the lake, whatever. We got these 5 humps, look like good spots for smallmouths to get on. The screenshot on the left, we got the wind coming out of the west. So I would fish the west side, all these humps, the side the wind's blowing into. And I'm going to go, I mean, they're kind of all angled a little off north-south. So I'm going to kind of head into the wind as I'm going up those, casting that hair jig as far as I can off the back of the boat, like 45 degrees off the back of the boat. Click the reel over, hold the rod, don't move it, don't twitch it, don't do nothing. Just keep the boat going a mile an hour. And, say all these humps are a quarter mile long. I mean, I could cover that whole area in an hour and tell you which humps have fish on it, where they are on the humps, how big they are. And on the screenshot on the right, we're going to do it with the wind coming out of the other side. I would just, basically adjust and fish the side the wind's blowing into on these humps, targeting the more aggressive fish. And there might be fish on the backside of these humps too, but if there's a school of fish on this hump somewhere, there's going to be some fish on that windy side. There might be more on the calm side, but at least I'll know that hump's productive. I can go back there, work it more thoroughly with some different baits. But this technique's just like the deal for covering water, especially on these big lakes.
It really is too. And one thing about going into the wind, these jigs are tiny. They'll be available through Outcast Tackle here pretty soon. This is something that takes a lot of time to do them right, and we will make an announcement once they're available, of course. But one thing about them, they are very, very light. And when you're going, if you got a little bit of the wind to help you cast them, it's hugely important. You don't want to try to cast it into the wind because the thing will land like 4 feet away from the boat. Definitely try to use that wind, and as Seth said, it helps control. And the other thing is, though, if the wind's a little too strong, you want a little wind. When it's calm, sometimes you can't get as close to them as you would like. They know you're there, but when it's too windy, your trolling motor's popping out of the water all the time, and that's a giant no-no. I mean, we were just talking about how maybe a little bit of what that prop nut could save us would be worth it. So your trolling motor sloshing in and out of the water is definitely not productive for you. So keep that in mind when you're fishing in the wind. Try to find that happy medium on that lake.
Here's my setup. Like I said, it's super critical for casting these jigs. They basically weigh nothing. Medium light rods, I'd recommend 7 to 7.5. Personally, I use a 7-foot medium light Daiwa Steez AGS. A 3000 spinning reel. Doesn't sound like much difference, but I see a lot of guys that are running 2000, 2500 spinning reels, and I get it. They're nice and light. That 3000 size spool and diameter in the reel is going to do a lot for you. You're going to cast further. Anytime you're fishing clearwater smallmouth, the further you can cast, provided they're shallow. Once they get out real deep, it don't matter. The further you can cast, the more bass you're going to catch, plain and simple. It's going to allow me to cast further. It actually has a smoother drag in it because they have a bigger drag surface area. And the diameter of the spool, not only, like I said, is that going to let me cast further, it's also going to manage line better. I mean, a lot of people don't like using spinning tackle because wind knots and stuff like that, but the larger diameter spools are really going to cut down on that. And then we're throwing this on I use 10-pound nano braid by Suffix. You got to use braided line as a must. It's the only thing you can cast these little jigs with. You just want something in that 1 to 3-4 pound test diameter, and then I finish it off with a 8-pound Suffix 100% fluorocarbon leader, and that's my hair jig setup. Like I said, that medium light action is critical, and the super light braid is critical, and using a bigger reel is going to help you too. But that is the setup for casting a hair jig. If you try throwing with straight fluorocarbon, it ain't going nowhere. That's for sure.
And one touch too, since he was on it with the 3000 size reel, if you are using straight fluorocarbon, that bigger spool size will also help from line twist, which there's nothing more frustrating than fluorocarbon twisting on your reel. And that bigger, wider spool picks up line a little quicker and a little better and prevents line twist. Now we're going to get into deep water structure fishing. Our spawn is over, and the fish generally tend to do one of two things. One, go out deep and live on structure, or two, get up real shallow, and sometimes they do both. In this particular one, we're going to talk about deep water structure fishing. I love structure fishing. Again, I get to get into my electronics, get to get my investment, my dollars out of them. And as you can see here in this these screenshots, a lot of times we're fishing big points, big humps, saddles, sitting out next to deep water. In this particular instance, you can see here I'm fishing a couple points, humps, and that one it's a saddle, and you can actually see the smallmouth out there. And that's pretty traditional if you're out fishing your Great Lake reef lakes and even lakes that are generally shallow lakes or like Mille Lacs and stuff like that, where they get out deeper at times. Oneida, you can get out on that structure and you can see them. There's not a whole heck of a lot down there. There's not a lot of grass. There's not a lot of anything. So you run into the schools and the bait fish. You just got to know you got to turn on your electronics now and go to work as if you were looking at them in the water. When they're out there, a lot of times this time of year, you look at Lake Erie and Oneida and Mille Lacs, stuff like that. When you're out fishing deep, we are literally sight fishing, but now we're turning to the electronics to do it. We're always going to be, for the most part, up on the bow when we're looking for this. Once you've found the productive water on your graph at your console, then you're going to jump up on your trolling motor and you're going to look for them. In this screenshot, you can see it was a smallmouth. This one actually got off, but he pulled off right away. But you can see, I could see him on the bottom. It originally started real low to the bottom and came up, grabbed my drop shot, and pulled off right away. Went back down to the bottom. But that's the name of the game. We'll sit over the top of them, and once you see one, it's a bass. So you're going to want to drop down and actually you can see your drop shot. Now, a lot of people, I think, get hung up sometimes because they can't see their drop shot when they're out there trying to do this. One, you need to have it pretty close to underneath the trolling motor. But if you're in real shallow water, not even real shallow water, but like 10, maybe even sometimes 15, you really can't, you're not really giving it the opportunity to get down. Your cone size isn't nearly as big as it is in 15 plus, 20, 30, 40. you have a lot bigger cone size on the front of your trolling motor, and it's going to pick that up. So don't always get frustrated. Make sure you're looking at the right kind of stuff. I am always just using my auto setting when it comes to Lowrance, when I'm using my sonar. I might tweak it a little bit, my ping setting and stuff, but that's just, you know, that's far more advanced and not necessary to the biggest extent. But just don't get frustrated. I see it a lot. Like, people want to know when I'm doing these electronics training, you know, how come I can't see it like you're showing me? And that's the first thing I'm going to tell you is, you know, and this screenshot was just over 20 feet deep. And look, I barely got it. I barely can see it. Now in 30, I'd see it a whole heck of a lot better. So just kind of keep that in mind. Rock grass transitions. This is one of my bread and butters. I love this kind of situation. I seek this kind of water out on every lake I go to, largemouth or smallmouth. But going to lakes like Champlain, I saw it a lot. I mean, an immense amount of it, where you have big milfoil humps. The grass has grown up on those humps, and you still got some rock transition areas where they're going to live. They're going to tend to get the best spot to get them is these smallmouth, unlike largemouth. They don't necessarily like to live in the grass, but they'll use the grass. They'll parallel it. They'll get on the end of it. And if you can get some rock on the end of it, that's even better. And in this particular one, you can see it's a little grass point coming off of that hump, and then it's got some scattered rock going to the right side of my boat, and I even got some bait fish and all that. And to me, that's going to be a smallie jackpot right there if it's that type of a fishery. Bass and vegetation. Here you have another. Then now I'm up on the trolling motor, and I can actually, in this particular instance, you can see on the Navionics map, I have a big point or a hump coming off the end, turning into a point, and a couple stalks of grass, and there's smallmouth sitting right on the edge of that deal. And those are hugely important. That ain't something I'm always doing. I just happen to grab that screenshot and see it perfectly. Generally, once I get around rock and grass and all that, I'm finding their home, not always looking for the actual fish. Some of my setups that I like to use when I'm out doing this kind of fishing, out deep structure fishing. Earlier in the year, I'm going to use like a darter, something that doesn't move a lot. It's ribbed, it's heavy, it disperses a lot of water, and I can fish it real slow. There's definitely a time and a place where I can use that bait to catch them in the summertime, but this is a staple for me right away. Kind of around the same time Seth was talking about throwing a jerkbait, this is going to be another bait that I'm going to have on my deck.
Yeah, and if any of you guys aren't familiar with it, Erie Darter by Poor Boys, it's a decent little drop shot bait in the summer, but that thing shines on a Outcast shakedown jig head, real cold water. I'm talking mid to upper 30s all the way up to 45, maybe even into the high 40s. That thing, there's something about it. Doesn't have a ton of action, but it pushes a lot of water. It'll just flat out fish a tube till the water gets warmer. Just a really killer cold water bait. So keep that in mind if you guys aren't familiar with that.
Some other baits that I use is a drop shot. In this one, I have the I'm dropping a BioVex Colt stick. Great little bait. A lot of times when we're fishing some of these northern Great Lakes and stuff, they have gobies, and you're going to want to use something a little fatter, smaller and fatter. It jumps up and down. Then maybe more of your finesse type deal. I also a jig worm. Jig worms are hugely important we use those all the time up north. I swear Minnesotans are born with skates on their feet and spinning rods in their hand. And a jig worm is something that I first learned how to catch a bass on. And actually just more recently have, the last couple of years been using it to catch smallmouth in those types of same exact situations. A tube is good all year round. I've always said I've never met a smallmouth who wouldn't eat my tube. I throw these around always. If I'm smallmouth fishing, I have a tube. Every smallie I've caught in the last few weeks was spitting crayfish up all the way back to the boat. They are crayfish eaters. A tube is awesome. And a swim bait, small little swim baits. They move water real well. Another great way, similar to the fly, where you can move water with them real fast. This is a great one. I use an Outcast muddy jig head on both of them. For me, a little 1/8 ounce one with the 3/0 hook is about perfect for any of those small little Kitech swim baits. Great setup. And my actual setup that I'm using is a custom built MHX SJ813. These rods I use for most all my summer fishing, except maybe the drop shot. It's got a little more backbone. It's a 3 power. and I can get them out of the grass. I can get hook sets from fish that are out there deeper. I'm using a Daiwa Ballistic 3000, a little bit stronger, a little more stronger drag for when I'm around my vegetation and stuff like that. Again, as Seth said, that 3000 size spool, hugely important. And then I'm back to the Daiwa J braid and 10-pound, going to a Daiwa Steez 10-pound leader. This gives or takes a little bit, but we do have a lot of zebra mussels up here. I may even bump up to a 12, and then down to an 8 or a 6. It just all depends. But for the most part, once I'm out a little deeper, I try to really make the 10-pound work. And or anytime I'm around rocks and zebra mussels, if I can make that 10-pound work, that's where I'm going to start on, and maybe go down to 8 and maybe go up to 12 if I have to. But for the most part, those are going to be my 3 sizes.
Yeah, and you can get away with a lot lighter line drop shotting just because it's your sinker on the bottom, so you're not your hook or suspended above the water. It doesn't get beat up that much. But when you're dragging tubes and stuff on the bottom, a lot of these places are covered in zebra mussels. 10, 12, 15-pound leaders might be necessary. I mean, some of the places are just nasty. You'll just make 4 or 5 casts and just drag your tube right off. So you try to use the lightest line you can get away with, but them zebra mussels, they definitely do some damage. So
they will. And don't think just bumping up line gives you the opportunity to not check your line all the time. I'm basically checking my line, especially in tournament play. I am checking my line on almost every single cast just to be sure it can get that bad. But then again, it's a give or take because of those zebra mussels. It makes the water a lot clearer, and the smallies get a little bit bigger and badder too. Now we're going to get into a shallow summer bite. This is, like I said, you either, for the most part, you're going to find 2 kind of bites with these smallmouth on the summer pattern. First, you're either going to find that deep water bite, or you're going to find that real super shallow bite. And sometimes you actually can find both, and a lot of it just has weather related. And I'll turn to Seth here and I'm break down again. He's back out on the reef. Imagine that.
Yeah, this shallow summer bite, this is really dictated by the weather. A lot of our fish are gonna be real deep in the summer, and there's something about it when it's the days that are like glass calm and 80, 90 degrees and bright sun, like the last time you would think a fish would want to get up shallow. But and this isn't a big numbers deal. This is kind of like little wolf packs or just big rogue cruisers. But I don't know if these are fish that sit out in 20, 25 feet of water the rest of the time and just get up there when the conditions get right. But the tops of these little reefs out on the main lake are really killer spots to look for these fish on those days. If you're struggling out deep and not catching much and the conditions are right for it, like I said, glass, calm, hot, bright sun, get up on top of these reefs and start looking for them. These little high spots, there's going to be a bunch of big boulders up there. I think they get up there and just start rooting around for crawfish, and really good place and technique to catch some really big fish in the middle of the summer. A really overlooked deal. It's summer, it's hot, water temp's hot. Guys have been catching them out deep for a while. The guys get real in tune with that and kind of overlook this shallow bite. So it's a really, really great way to catch some big fish this time of year.
One thing I want to say about that too, when he says overlooked, I can't express that. A quick, real little story. I remember doing a few years back. I was doing really well fishing for smallmouths in these series out deep. I was really starting to get into my electronics, and had a few really nice tournaments right away in a row out fishing deep. And then I'll never forget it. It was a hot, sweltering day, and here I thought everything was going to go in my favor for these fish out deep, and I got my lunch like absolutely handed to me. And here I find out guys are like in 2 feet of water or less, visually sight fishing for them. And like you said before, super slick. Them fish just moved right up. And sometimes I don't even know why they do it, but they do. They can see well, and they just slide right up. Rock and sand transitions, these are hugely important always when we're out fishing. All of these, everything we've talked about so far, this applies to it. Even bed fishing, lately I've been going around these transitions, and it seems like maybe you have the perfect little sand rock down right where that drops off, like a foot or two into the sand, and it's bed throughout, scattered on that whole deal. So transitions are big. Sometimes this can be weed to sand. weed to rock. But rock and sand is traditional northern smallie fishing. That's, you kind of want that mix. You don't always want a lot of rocks, like where it's too much rock. You want that little bit of mix, and like you pointed out earlier, Seth did with the just those little tiny changes in the bottom give you those. It gives them places to hide in relatively wide open water. So you have to imagine they still want to be around something, and these transition lines are hugely important. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be opposed to jumping right on that point and starting to clip right down that side, and I can almost guarantee I can peg off fish doing that anytime I need to get a bite. Some shallow flat baits that we all use. Seth turned me on to a Rapala X prop. I've used this not only for smallies, but for spots too. There's something about it. These types of prop baits got big in Florida, and I don't really fish this like they do down there. It's just this, they're hugely orientated to the surface that smallmouth can see very, very well, and they are all about finishing
like coming up.
Yeah, and anything that's somewhat injured on the surface, a smallmouth is all about finishing off. And a X prop is great because I can throw it out there, couple twitches with it, let it sit still, and it just looks perfect. A popper is probably one of my favorite baits to go to for a smallmouth up on these shallow situations. Whether they blow up or not, these little poppers, this is a 1/4 ounce one. I hand tie that feather treble just so I can get a little bit more feather. I don't like the synthetic material stuff. I really like, just like we like our marabou jigs, I like the good hair, feathers on my treble. It holds more water and allows me to cast a smaller profile bait, which is huge for a smallmouth, a lot further distance. And the Biovex Phase 70 is my go-to for smallmouth anytime throughout the summer. New bait that Biovex is releasing here at ICAST is the Biovex Joint Bait 110S, and there's also a 142 size, which is I've had awesome success on with smallmouth, but it's also more geared to your largemouth to go against like a big spook type of deal. But there's really not a bait like this on the market. They slither up on top. When you stop the bait, it still kind of moves in its little S pattern that it runs in. Real cool bait, gets a bunch of bites in real slick water. Swims across those reefs way too confidently for a smallmouth, and a smallmouth looks at that like that's getting eaten now. And great bait. And then I gotta say, a Cinco catches a bass anywhere in the world, and a wacky rig Cinco is a staple bait. Probably #1 for me on these reefs, and I know Seth's the same.
Yeah, killer bait for sight fishing. Something about it, I don't even know what they think it is, but it just flat out catches them everywhere we go. Not a real tip I want to give on that though. When you're sight fishing these shallow smallmouths, a lot of times when you see the fish, he sees you too. So he takes off, he starts cruising down the ridge or the hump or whatever. If he takes a good solid direction, a lot of people I see make this mistake. They see the fish and they throw the bait like right on his head or maybe 2 feet in front of him. But when you see that fish and he sees you and he takes off, he's kind of spooked for a second. He's going to swim off a little bit, get out of sight, and then he's going to get comfortable again. So a cool trick I do a lot when I see these fish up shallow, I'll, just burning down the tops of these humps and stuff looking for them, and you do bump one and he kind of, he maybe runs down the edge of the little break or whatever's on top. If you can figure out which direction he's going, I'll actually take that Senko and throw it about as far as I can in front of him. And I'm throwing this on straight fluorocarbon, so it's not a terribly long cast, maybe 20, 30 yards at best. Throw that bait out as far in front of them. I don't know what it is. They just get away from the boat and they ain't worried about you anymore. And they're way easier to catch than if you try throwing right on those fish. I mean, if they're being dumb and sitting there and easy to catch, go throw right on them. But if you're bumping them and they're spooky, throw that bait as far out as you can out in front of them. And like I said, they're super visual feeders. I mean, smallmouths, they're not like largemouths. They're not really relying on that lateral line, picking up vibrations and listening for rattles. I mean, everything they do is pretty much all visual. So just getting that bait out in front of them, and like I said, a lot of the water we're fishing is clear water. They can see that bait a long ways off. So don't be afraid to bomb that thing way out in front of the fish that are cruising around out there rather than throwing it right on their head. It's just going to get you a lot more bites.
It will too. And another thing, A lot of times we'll find busting smallies, maybe one or two. They roll around in packs. One rule of thumb that we all go by up here is where there's one smallmouth, there's 20 of them. Huge pack orientated fish. And a lot of times you'll just be going around, towing the hair jig, doing whatever you are, and all of a sudden there's a boom boom off to the side of the boat. I don't think there's anything better to throw at them than a wacky rig Senko. It seems like you can cast that thing out there and it barely hits the bottom, and you may as well just set the hook because they're on it as long as you are somewhat fast with it. And that's also, out of all these baits, that's the bait that I always have available, not on my keeper, sitting there hanging off the side of the boat, ready to get tossed.
Yeah.
And if you're fishing with somebody, you see one bust, you both should throw them over there because, like Seth was talking about, that they're pack orientated. They're in schools. They use their eyes. They're like wolves, where your largemouth's more like a mountain lion. It's an ambush predator. It hides and it waits for something to come by and it jumps out and grabs it. Smallies are way more like wolves. They're in big packs, and where there's one, again, there's another one. So I can't tell you how many times we see one bust. We both try to beat each other to it, and we both end up getting rewarded with the fish for doing it.
Yeah, and keeping that Senko just ready to go on the deck also pays off. A lot of times, like you said, they're in groups. You hook one, there's another 2, 3, follow it up to the boat. That little Senko, have it ready to go, pitch it in there when you're fighting the fish, and it's going to put another fish in your boat. Take advantage of them while they're biting,
All right, before we're about to get into questions, and like we did last time, we want to take everybody's question. We really, really, really appreciate your support, you being on here. But we'd like to plug our next one. Like I said, we're going to try to do these as monthly as possible. We both got a pretty hectic July traveling schedule, so we're going to get to this one right at the end of June. It's going to be June 29th, and it's called Locating Hard Bottom. We've had a lot of emails after our first webinar. There's definitely an interest. We'll get into all kind of hard bottom stuff, smallmouth, largemouth, and everything in between. How to find hard bottom in weeds, how to find rock piles and rock spines and all that stuff. So please check out our webinar. Follow us on social media, and it'll be on June 29th, Locating Hard Bottom. And lastly, we'd like to thank Navionics. You can get on their mailing list here. They support this. It's not free to host these webinars, and Navionics is great. They step up to the plate and allow us to do this. And then also, both Seth and I's email is on here. We urge you to please contact us. Yeah. We're giving them to you for a reason. We want people to contact us. We know what it's like to want information, to want to learn what guys are doing, and it's a great opportunity. And any feedback you have, good or bad, please send it over. Hopefully it's more good than bad.
Yeah, and we're both on Facebook and Instagram. You can message us on there if you got any other questions. And as soon as you send them to it, I'll get right back to you. I know Josh will too, and not a problem. We just like spreading the knowledge.
We're going to hit the questions. Like I said, keep them coming throughout. While we're asking them, we want to try to answer as many as we possibly can. What do we got?
Okay, first question. Jason asks, at what depths are you fishing jerkbaits? I see in the package that they are marked for different depths. Basically, the one I'm throwing is a Rapala Shadow Rap. It comes in a shallow and a deep. I really like that deep diving bait, especially, like I said, smallmouth, super clear water. They're going to come a long ways for a bait. I'll fish a jerkbait a lot deeper than most people will. And they like to suspend a lot too. So throwing a jerkbait in 20, 30 feet of water is not out of the question, but most of the time, I'm fishing 12-foot or less with a jerkbait. I'll throw that deeper one a lot on those like sharper breaks and stuff. So when I get up on the shallow flats, I'll throw the shallower diving one.
Aaron, here's a question for me, but Aaron says, congratulations on cashing some checks on the elites. That's got to feel good.
Thank you, Aaron. It does.
Do you have any preference for type of weight to use for drop shot, like cylinder or balls? I do. I like the cylinder one. It doesn't get hung up on me near with the ball. I think the ball was like the first one that was out, and I still have a bunch. Every now and then I'll use them when I'm bed fishing or something, but for the most part, I definitely like that cylinder. I can kind of drag it on the bottom. It tends to not get hung up near as bad. So I'm going to give the nod to the cylinder for the most part. And if I could only choose one, it would be a cylinder. I could definitely use it for every application. Do you crank much for smallies when covering water? Also, what baits and colors and depth zone seasons?
I do crank a bit for smallmouths.
Typically, my favorite time to crank for them is that late summer, early fall period. Kind of when them fish are coming out of the depths, starting to move up a little bit for that shallow fall deal. The crankbaits, with cranking smallies versus largemouths, you kind of always want to have bottom contact. You're trying to like bang off stuff to get a reaction bite. Smallmouths, you do not have to be hitting the bottom whatsoever. It doesn't hurt, but they will definitely come up and eat a crankbait that's only halfway down the water column. What I actually look for more so than action when I'm looking for a crankbait for smallmouths, the smaller size, I guess it'd be the original Wiggle Wart by Storm, DT10, and there's a bait from Rapala called a Rapala cranking rat. It runs 14, 15 feet deep, but has a real small body. I go for the smaller bodies because smallmouths, I mean, like their name, they have a small mouth. When you get into baits like DT16s and bigger baits like that, you're always going to end up hooking those fish outside of the mouth, and they jump, they're pulling, they end up getting off. The reason I like them smaller profile baits is the smallest can actually get them in their mouth, you know, that little Wiggle Wart or like that little crank and wrap, real small profile. They can get it in their mouth. I got both hooks in the mouth. I know I'm going to land that fish. And that's actually how I go about choosing my crankbaits for smallmouths. I'm looking for a smaller profile bait just so they can fit it in their mouth. You'll still get a bunch of bites from like a DT16 or 20. You're just landing percentage is going to go down a little bit. It's not like a 5-6 pound largemouth. He'll swallow anything he wants, you know. So, like I said, I go basically for the smallest body style I can get and still get some good depth out of them.
And still be able to catch them. Because let's be honest, smallies are mean. They'd probably eat a DT 182 if they came out.
They'll definitely hit it. But if you can get in their mouth. And another little tip for you guys that I actually run smaller hooks on my crankbaits for smallmouths. Like, say we'll take a DT10, for example. If I was largemouth fishing, I'd be running maybe like number 4 hooks. I'd actually go down to number 6 hooks for smallmouths, just for that same reason that they don't always get the bait so good in their mouth. That smaller hook, especially with a short shank hook, it actually keeps that bait pinned tighter to their head, so they don't get as much leverage when they jump. I mean, if you're cranking smallies, the water's warm enough, they're going to jump. So keeping that bait tight to their head when they're jumping is going to land you a lot more fish. There's not as much play in there as there would be if you use bigger trebles. So that's another little tip for you.
A question from Nick says, will you guys use hydrowave for ice fishing? Neither one of us really ice fish, but I do know people do. A matter of fact, it makes total sense because you're not nearly as mobile ice fishing as you are normal fishing. And calling something to you and stimulating whatever small environment you have underneath your hole be hugely important. Give a shout out to my buddy Mark Kortz. Our buddy Mark Kortz, he does his fair share of ice fishing, and I know he's huge into the hydrowave. So definitely. What glasses do you use?
Amphibious.
For sure, both of us. Amphibious, the best. They float, but to me that's just a side note.
Super comfortable. I can wear them all day. I used to wear a different brand. They came with glass lenses, super heavy. They're fine if you fish a couple hours a day, but anybody that's hardcore and you're going out 14, 16 hours in a day wearing glasses, they end up hurting the top of your ears. You're pushing your glasses up on your hat just to wear them the rest of the day. Amphibians are so light and so comfortable, you can wear them all day and never notice you got them on your head. So
really, are sunglasses made for this new generation fishermen and stuff? Great set of eyewear. Does my whole spool need to be fluoro, or is it just as good to tie a fluoro leader onto braid? I think this maybe might go to. We mainly both use braid to fluoro for a vast majority of our spinning reel. Except you did mention, Seth, on your wacky rig Senko, you like all fluoro. Maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, that's basically going down to the hook. Anytime you're using those small, like nose hook type hooks for drop shot or wacky worm, and I actually prefer straight fluorocarbon just because a lot of the times you'll actually end up like skin hooking the fish where you just get like a little piece of meat in the top of their mouth, or almost like where the barb isn't even pushed through into their mouth. And that fluorocarbon, that stretch in there is going to allow you to land a lot more fish. I actually use like a little tiny, like straight shank flipping hook when I'm drop shotting bigger stuff, something I can rig, Texas rig, or just thread on there. And then I'll go to braid. I prefer braid if I can get away with it, but if I have to use those little hooks, fluorocarbon's the way. It just that stretch is needed to keep that little piece of skin hooked on there without pulling off. If you go to braid and that fish shakes his head real hard quick or makes a quick little dig, it'll rip that little piece of skin off and you'll end up losing them. So, yeah, if I'm casting anything, it's pretty much with braid to a leader, other than a wacky Senko or a drop shot nose hook.
Right on. Brian asks, where are these recorded? I would love to watch this again. We appreciate that. And for those that missed it, and for those that would wish to share this with anybody, we'd appreciate it. These are definitely recorded, and they will be on YouTube, and we'll share them on our social media and all that once it gets out there and on any forums that you may have came from. Where you got this link, we will definitely share that the recording is out there. Usually we'll have her done by, I'd say, Monday of the following week. What do we got? Fiberglass or graphite rod? What is your preference and why? Also, do you recommend a one-piece rod or a two-piece? I build my own rods. I'm very picky about my rod blanks. Fiberglass is a good option, and it was definitely a really good option back in the day. Fiberglass would work for a lot of these. I tend to not use it, or I don't use it because graphite's so much lighter. I do like the added feel it gives, but for a lot of these techniques we're talking about, I mean, you can throw a jerkbait with a fiberglass rod, no problem. Matter of fact, I'm trying to use a graphite that emulates fiberglass. It has the same kind of very moderate bend to it. One that when they bite, I don't need to feel the bite. I don't need to feel them hit it. When they hit it, I know they got it, and now it just turns to keeping that fish hooked up with those real little trebles. So I'm all graphite. I don't actually own a fiberglass rod right now. And then one-piece, two-piece, all my rods are one-piece. Two-piece would be good if you had a really small boat or you travel a lot or something like that, but for the most part, for me, and I'm probably Seth, I'm going to say we have all one-piece rods. Seth, do you guys ever still use the good old split shot rig?
I do not, but definitely catches fish, without a doubt. I don't throw out much, but it's a good little finesse technique. You're going to get bites on it for sure.
Mojo rig, split shot rig, it's all relatively the same. I did catch my first smallmouth ever on a split shot rig, and probably also my last one I've ever caught on a split shot rig. So, but it catches them, and I owe a lot because that fish changed my life. So I'd throw a split shot rig, and now I might a little more now that was brought up. How big of a leader do you put on your drop shots? It's a good question. Going back to bed fishing, I should have said this before with the drop shots. A lot of times I'm gonna use my shortest drop shot leaders when I'm bed fishing. I'm just trying to get it down there, and I still want a little bit of that weightlessness. I want it right in front of their face, so I'm gonna use a shorter leader. And when I'm talking short leader, maybe 5 inches, 6 inches, something like that. When I'm fishing deeper water, I'm going to tend to maybe bust it up to 10, 12, or whatever it dictates. If I need it, 12, 10 inches seems to be a pretty good number. But one thing, too, if the water's a little dirtier, I may revert back a little bit and, again, go to a shorter leader because with less water clarity, my belief is that those fish are going to hold a little bit tighter to the bottom. And so I still want that same kind of presentation, but at the same time, I might need to either one, be more patient with the bait and let it fall down there and stay there longer, or two, again, revert back to a leader. What would you say?
I actually go quite a bit longer on my drop shots. Bedfish, I go short as well. The rest of the year, I'm fishing at least 18 inches to 2, maybe sometimes even 3 feet. Like I said, smallmouth love going up. The visual deal, if I can get a little higher off the bottom, I can see it better. But I tend to fish a lot longer drop shot for smallmouth than I do for largemouth.
How do you dial in your hydro wave system? Turn it on to power pattern. Works really well. It's not...
Turn the volume all the way up.
Turn it up and get it going. Get a little confidence in it. Don't overthink it too much. You're stimulating the environment is what you're trying to do. The hydro wave, it doesn't need much dialing. The only reason I say power pattern is we talked about power pattern. We both like it a lot. for our smallmouth fishing, for a lot of our fishing actually.
Yeah.
For me though, it's a good starting one because it's already looped, meaning it's on for a while and then it shuts off, and and then it's on again and then it shuts off, and it does that. It's not constant, and I think that's real important to start, just to get used to it, get it going. And I really think power pattern gets the bigger fish bite because they're so dominant. Big fish don't care when they hear other fish. It ain't nothing. I just saw it yesterday. Actually, I was smallmouth fishing in the middle of a reef, 2 days ago, where all of a sudden there's about a 45-inch muskie just staring at the trolling motor. He's King Alpha. He does what he wants on them reefs out on that lake. He doesn't care what's eating. If anything's eating, he's going to start eating. He's going to move in there, and that's what power pattern gives you. So I think that's a good one to work with, and from there, it's just trial and error. And from there, it's just trial and error. So you talked about the power pattern sound on the Hydro Wave. I do not think I see this feature on mine. If you don't, the new H2, the new Hydro Wave H2, it comes already standard on it. But like Seth and I originally, we had the classic units. We both went out and got the expansion cards. It's like 30, 40, $50, somewhere in that deal. And I believe it's on the KVD bait fish one. Yeah.
Sure.
So that would be the one you'd need, and you just screw it into the bottom of the unit, and it'll give you additional sounds, and that's where the power pattern came from. That's one of, I believe, Kevin Van Dam's actual sounds that he wanted. So that's where you get that one. How deep would you consider deep water for smallies, or does it depend on the body of water?
It definitely depends on the body of the water. If you go to the Mississippi River, deep might be 10 feet. You go out to Erie, deep might be 30, 40 feet of water. So that's going to be relative on the term. I mean, I guess if I had to throw some general guidelines out there, I'd say anything over 12, 15 feet of water, we're getting into deep water.
How do you update your Navionics using the computer? It's a good question. If you go on my website, it's joshdouglasfishing.com. You can see, actually, if you go to the video vault, you can look through it and see how you do it. All the new Navionics cards now are not even that new anymore, but relatively new Navionics cards are updatable, whether that's for freshest data or sonar charts, which is some of the newer maps that we're seeing. And as you can actually update your card, every card comes with a 1-year free subscription, and you can just use your computer, go right on to Navionics.com, slide your card in there, and download or get a new freshest data update. Again, you can check that out at joshdouglasfishing.com. How far does the Hydro Wave transmit? It's a good question. It's got a lot of variables.
Yeah, definitely a lot further than you can cast. Like I said with them loons, I've seen them 200-300 yards away and end up right underneath your boat a minute later. So I suppose there's a lot of variables in that, but definitely further than you can cast. And like I said, a loon can hear it at least 200 yards away minimum. So
for sure.
I'm assuming bass have similar hearing. I don't know.
How long are smallmouth usually spooked? Man, that's actually a good question. I wish I had a perfect answer for that, so I knew. Sometimes when I spook, when one comes up to the boat and turns away, how long I need to wait for a bite again. A lot like how I feel about I dock fish a considerable amount. Used to dock fish a ton. And I always felt like sometimes I'd see one sitting outside and he'd see me, and then he'd jet underneath that pontoon lift, and I'm like, oh, I can catch that bass. Because for whatever reason, they get something over their head and they think that they're good. I think same thing can be said with the smallmouth, and like what Seth talked about earlier. It's very notorious for them to, matter of fact, sometimes they freak you out. You look down and there's a big smallie right at the boat. When they jet off, look which way they go. I think that's mostly important, because a lot of times they're showing you where they're going and where the rest of the school is. And if you're really quick and you make that cast in that direction, like Seth was talking about, far past them, all you'll do is you'll get another one where that one came from to bite, and it's like that whole spook thing never happened again. And they'll just start biting and biting again. But if it saw you and it spooked, again, smallies are schoolers, so look for the rest of them, or if not, I would just leave and come back, I guess, and be a little stealthier next time.
Yeah, a lot of variables in that. Usually, if they're out of sight, they're good to go, and if that's not working for you, maybe put a waypoint on them, leave and come back.
Call it a good spot.
20, 30 minutes, or do whatever you got to do and come back to them. But variables in that question.
Who sells BioVex? I'd like to try the Amp Stay or the Phase 70. BioVex is a relatively new tackle company to the U.S. They're Japanese-made baits. BiovexUSA.com is the U.S. They're, like I said, BioVex Japan has been around for a decade or more. BioVex USA it's in the pretty infant stages. You can go to BiovexUSA.com and definitely order them, or find the dealer list there for current dealers that are carrying their baits. This is definitely geared towards Seth. I have a Rapala Husky Jerk and a Rapala X-Rat, both jerkbait types. I've had better luck with the Husky Jerks and catching smallies. Have you ever used the X-Rat, which he has? If so, do you work them differently?
That's a good question, and I do. That Husky Jerk, that's more of a cold water bait. It's a lot more subtle in its action. It doesn't dart near as much. And then that X-Rap's kind of on the other end of the deal. That's a bait I'm going to throw in the summer a lot. Super erratic. Basically, just kind of matching the mood of the fish based on water temp. You know, when it's real cold, early spring, late fall, they're sluggish. That real subtle Husky Jerk's a good way to catch them. Then in the summer, when that water gets hot, they're more aggressive and more willing to chase stuff down. That's where that more aggressive and erratic X-Rap really shines.
And I can sit and talk about fancy jerk baits from Japan and all that kind of stuff, but none of those would even be here if it wasn't for a bait that catches bass like a Husky Jerk. I mean, that thing was catching bass before both of us were born, so definitely a good cold water bait. How long do spawning fish remain in an area? It's a good question. Sometimes forever. Sometimes they'll stay on that same boat.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then they tend to, if they go deeper, they're still not far from that area where they were spawning, as long as the habitat's there. You kind of revert back to where we started with some of those deeper spots, or I'm sorry, back earlier in the webinar about some of those deep spots. And they all come from somewhere. They're all fed from something. A lot of times you find those areas where they were bedding, and you can find them out deeper. But it ain't nothing for on some of these reef lakes. That's where those fish live. That's their home, is that reef. So
yeah, you can kind of connect the dots. I mean, say you got a hump out in the middle of the lake that comes up to 6 to 8 feet of water. They might be on top of that when they spawn, and then look for those points that run off a bit out into 15, 20 feet of water. Might be ready to spend their entire summer.
And again, then they move right back up on those slick hot days like he was talking about. So they tend to stay there. If the question's geared more towards how long do they spawn for, a lot of that is just so relative to the weather, what they're doing, and sometimes they're just still sitting on that bed, but they might not even be bedding anymore. That's just their home. How long does the pre-spawn bite last in the north, in parentheses Oneida? Again, that's another variable. Oneida is going to be a lot like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada. It's just all variable. We know one day it can be 80, the next day it can be snowing up here in the spring and in the fall. But the pre-spawn bite can last. It can come back. You know, it can leave and it can come back.
Still get waves of fish too.
Yeah, and they're not. The whole lake doesn't spawn at a certain time. You know, your northern bays and stuff, they're going to spawn first. Because that's mostly protected, holds better water or warmer water. So at night, I'm going to say, the pre-spawn bite is all, but once that water temperature again starts getting up into those high 50s and in the 60s, especially when it starts staying there overnight, those fish are going to be there. And there's something territorial about a smallmouth too. Once they claim something as theirs, they tend to be there. They don't necessarily pull off all the time. I think water clarity has more to do with it than even the drop in the temp. So it's a vague question, but it's a good one. Do you parallel the steep banks when using the jerk bait?
So if it's super steep, I will parallel the breaks with a jerk bait. Most of the time, though, if it's a break where a fish could be on top of it and on bottom of it. Say if it's like a real steep break where it goes from like a foot to like 20, they're probably going to be like on the break. In that case, I would parallel it. But a lot of those steep breaks, there'll be like a big flat coming out into, maybe 6-7 feet of water, then dumping out into 20, where you could have fish on top of it. If that's the case, I'll kind of like 45-degree cast the jerk bait. across the break and work it out till deep water. Let's go to the next question here from Brent. Is the Hydro Wave the blue and black cones on the props in the trolling motor pictures? If not, what are they? Does the Hydro Wave help to block noise? That's the equalizer, the prop nut on the trolling motor, the black and blue ones you're seeing in the pictures. That cuts down on the trolling motor noise. The Hydro Wave does not, but it plays sounds of fish feeding, which gets fish biting for you again. The next question is the jointed BioVex bait available?
The jointed BioVex bait is soon available, actually, in ICAST in about a month. It's coming from Japan and all that. That is one of their showcase baits that they're showing off at ICAST or debut at ICAST. So the joint bait 110 and the joint bait 142 will soon both be available July, August.
Okay. Next question is from Tim. I have an Elite chirp on the console and an Elite DSI only on the bow. I have the nav chip on the console but not on the bow. Would you recommend swapping that around, or is it worthwhile to get another nav chip for the bow? The nav chip is compatible with both Elite 5 DSI and Elite 7 chirp.
Yeah, definitely. If you had, with Lowrance, it's any of their HDS models or touch models, all that, you can share a map card now. And even Humminbird 2 on the Onyx and Ion units, you can share a Navionics card. With that said, if you cannot do that, yes, you absolutely have to have a map card up on your front deck. I don't know what I would do without it. So I've said this so many times doing electronic seminars and stuff. My Lowrance is great. It really finds fish and all that, but my map card is what gives life to that unit and gives me a place to start. And to throw a buddy of ours under the bus real quick, JP Kimbrough from Louisiana, got done doing a collegiate event, and he travels around with us quite a bit. He came up here to catch some smallies. He's very, very excited about his new nitro that he just got, and he convinced us when we were going up for screenshots and all that to bring his boat, and we asked him if he had cards. Of course, we show up at the ramp, and he's got South cards, and here I'm embarrassed. The Navionics guy doesn't even have a map card, and you show up to a place like Lake Mille Lacs or any of these big bowl areas or Oneida Erie, I don't even know. You almost should just go home. You should just go home and get your card, because you wouldn't know where to go. You wouldn't know what to start on, where to fish. You'd be guessing the entire day. And lucky for us, we all had the Navionics web app on our telephone. So we knew we could do that. We reverted back to that. They don't replace the big graph, but it definitely got us out in a pinch. Came in huge for us, and but we still had to give JP a hard time for that one.
All right. A question from Tony. He says, Seth, I met you at Havasu. You gave me a hair jig. When and where will I be able to buy one? You mentioned something on the webcast. Yes, these will be sold on Outcast Tackle's website. The date of availability, not sure, probably late summer, early fall. JJ asks, what are your preference on tube rods? I like them at least. I use a 7.2 medium heavy Tatula. I want a lot of backbone. For setting the hook at long distances on the tube hook, I'll let my drag deal with if I'm fishing lighter line or not. But 7-foot medium heavy to 7.5-foot medium heavy is what you want to throw a tube on.
What is the best pattern for success for Clearwater smallies after they leave their beds? I think the hair jig is my favorite, which is actually really good pre-spawn and post-spawn.
It is.
It's good always, but...
And anytime there's a bug hatch going on, if you got mayflies hatched, then it'll just dominate every other bait in the box, hands down.
And whether they think the hair jig's a fly, I don't know. I haven't decided that yet, but I will tell you they're definitely looking up in the water column, and they're zeroing in on really little small bugs and stuff, and all of a sudden your hair jig comes through and it's lights out. So that's going to be my best pattern. Outside of that, after they leave their beds, again, I'm going to revert back to looking for them or snapping a tube around those. And even a jerkbait, smallmouth
top water,
jerkbait that's not just a spring deal. So all those things we kind of talked about between the shallow water summer bite and then the deeper bite, those baits that we pointed out, those are our staples. What is the deepest you have caught a smallmouth, and do you have to fizz them here in Minnesota?
Me, I think about 28 feet's the deepest I've ever caught a fish in Minnesota, like on the bottom. I don't fizz them. Anybody that lives in the north knows what they're called depth bombs. They're like a ounce and a half lead sinker with like a little clip on it. People use them for ice fishing. Like you attach your bait to it, drop your bobber down, you can set your bobber depth. That's what I use for catching deep water small. So I actually take two of them and clip one on each pectoral fin on the bass. The two, pectoral fins right behind the gills on the belly. That keeps them upright all day long if they're sitting on their side. I personally don't fizz fish. I don't know how to do it, and there's a good chance of killing them if you don't do it right. So I just throw them clips on there, keeps them upright in the live well all day long. They'll live no problem until you can let them go and they can get back to where they were right.
What kind of jig head weights do you mainly use? Depending on, that's a tricky question. What kind of jig head weights? Eighth ounce tube jig. If I'm going tube jig, I mean, it's all relative to where you're fishing. If you're out in real deep water, you're talking 3/8, half, maybe even a 3/4, I guess. And then if you're fishing shallow water, Sturgeon Bay, stuff like that, you're talking 16th, 8th, 5/16 quarter. Swim in a swim bait. We like the Outcast money jig and talking about throwing like a jig worm and stuff.
Use it for a ton of stuff.
Yeah, 3/32, 8th, and 5/16 are really good sizes. I mean, you can kind of get out of your whole largemouth deal about the ounce and a quarter, stuff like that. You can get away from that, but I'm going to say 3/8 and down a lot, and then even when you're using your half ounce and stuff, the only thing that I do when I got to go big is I might try to find tungsten, or try to find something smaller that I can use, or compact. A lot of times you can just take your standard jig and like a hula grub or something and make that thing a little bit more compact than what you would for a largemouth to give away with the extra bulk from the weight. What kind of knot do you prefer to join braid to fluorocarbon?
I use a modified Albright, and I've gotten tying this FG or FJ knot too. Modified Albright's a real good way to go. Little tip for you: if you're using that super light braid, that 1 pound diameter, I'll actually double up my braid and tie that modified Albright as well.
And when you're saying 1 pound diameter, what would that relate to for some people in poundage?
You're talking, depending on the brand, 4 to 6, 8 pound test braid.
So most of your 10 to 12 and stuff like that, you're good to go with that other knot.
Yeah.
You guys use mono anymore, especially like on light wire jig worm for some give, or you're solely on the rod of choice? It's a good question. I don't, Brad, that's a great question. I don't really use mono much anymore. To be dead honest with you, very, very, very seldom. Every now and then, sometimes throwing top water on real light stuff. But even that now, kind of braid with a monofilament or even a floral leader or something like that is a good choice. I really don't use mono, especially not on jig worm. I don't want any stretch. I want as least stretch as I can get away with. Sometimes I need some stretch, and that's when fluorocarbon's that perfect. And mono floats, and on a jig worm I want it to go down. Fluorocarbon sinks. I really, 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 and I think Seth can test this too. If I can use it always, if I can get away with the braid to a fluorocarbon leader, I'm going to. That gives me everything, and as long as you've got your knot mastered, you're good. You're good there. So for the vast majority, I prefer that. Otherwise, we're talking straight fluorocarbon when we're reverting back to some of our smaller hooks and stuff like that. What settings do you use on your Lowrance to tune in thermocline? You don't need to change anything on your Lowrance. Like I said before, I change it, and back to the last webinar, we'll definitely touch on this on the one coming up on hard bottom. If I'm using my structure scan or down scan, I'm playing with settings a lot more. If I am on my traditional sonar, I am almost exclusively running the auto setting, and that'll show me a thermocline just fine. I don't have a ton of experience with thermocline. I can definitely tell you when I see it, but again, that's just on the auto setting, so I really wouldn't mess with that too much. What size is the Shadow Rat mentioned with the 3 trebles?
Well, at this point, the Shadow Wrap only comes in one size. It comes in a shallow and a deep runner, but they're both the same size.
What temp range, Jamie Sims is asking, what temp range are you looking for in May, June for a good bite in shallow water on a lake like Erie?
I'd say basically high 40s, low 50s. You're gonna have some fish moving shallow in the spring for sure. Pay a lot of attention to that wind. Wherever that wind's blowing into, that's gonna be your warm surface water. That's gonna be a big deal. I've seen, just fishing in a little bay from one side the wind's blowing onto, the side the other is not blowing out of. Almost a 10-degree difference in water
Small
temperature.
Bays, literally, you're talking like half a mile across it, and it can change that much.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the wind a lot, and realistically, the best like shallow bite's gonna be like 52 and up. But there's definitely gonna be some fish starting to get shallow, in the high 40s.
Todd's asking, when fishing islands, do you want to fish the side the wind waves are hitting into, or on the other side protected by the waves? It's a good question, and it has, again, a lot of variables to that. If I'm sight fishing or something, and I'm actually, it depends. If it's getting really dirty, that's when it tends to shut down my deal. Again, they're orientated to being able to see, and anytime I get around smallmouth that are acclimated and used to clear water, and now all of a sudden they're getting dirty water, it tends to slow down my bite. And then I'm going to look on the other side in that situation and try to find that cleaner water that's been protected from it. But like at the same time, like what Seth was just discussing, if the wind's blowing in there and I'm looking for that warmer water and my color's staying relatively neutral, I'm probably going to try to fish out in that. As long as I can still be stealthy and move around, I'm not generally overly concerned with being able to see them. I know what it is. I know they're aggressive. I'll know their bite if I just fan cast. So it's just a variable. It's give and take. But once the water temp, if the water temp is warmer, I'm going to try to fish there. And if I'm starting to lose clarity, then I may start to look around that backside just to try to find a little bit more water clarity. When is the water temp getting warm enough to stop fishing the jerkbait? Asked Daryl.
For me, it never quits. That's a year-round bait for me for smallmouths for sure, and a lot of guys don't throw them in the summer. I mean, obviously they shine really well in that, mid 40 to mid 50 degrees in the spring, and then on the way back down in the fall too. But I throw a jerkbait all summer. I just change my cadence. I'm gonna fish it with softer twitches and longer pauses in the spring, and when we get in that summer period, I just hammer on that thing as hard as I can all the way back to the boat. Maybe one pause halfway back and one pause just about to where I can start to see it. Other than that, I'm just covering water, just fishing it like a maniac.
Yeah, you find that bite in the summertime and it's a good bite, you'll be wore out by the time the day is done. I promise you that. You might be wore out of about 6 casts, especially if they're biting. Edwin asks, when searching for deep water smallies, more specifically zigzagging the saddle, are you driving around with the motor or trolling motor to find the school? And then says, thank you, Josh and Seth. Great presentation. Learned a lot. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for the question. Definitely
check into our next one, and we always like to hear that. Back to the question, when searching for deep water smallies, I'm on my big engine using my graphs that are at my face when I'm trying to find their home. Not so much. I'm not really overly concerned about seeing the actual fish. Once I get up on my trolling motor, then I'm using it to find the fish more. Zigzagging pattern, I will use a zigzagging pattern to get familiar with the structure that I'm fishing, to try to cover more water that way. And, of course, if I'm using the top one, my front graph, then I may do a zigzagging if they're just kind of all over that reef or whatever it is, a piece of structure, and I'm just going around trying to peg up fish. But at the same time, going back to some of the stuff we talked about in the webinar about the contour lines on the edges and the drops and the high points, then I may not necessarily be zigzagging, trying to just go in that straight pattern and just try to cover all that water. So zigzagging pattern, yes, I do use it when I'm on the big engine. I can cover a lot of water. I can get very familiar with the structure quick. And yeah. Next question, when using the Hydra Wave, what is your go-to sound to use when fishing?
For me, it's power pattern most of the time.
For both of us.
Unless I'll get into like feeding frenzy and schooling blitz if you're dealing with like fish that are actively schooling and blowing up. But day in and day out, that power pattern's the deal for me.
Troy is asking, Seth, what's your favorite shadow wrap color for clear? And then for your stained kind of tannic acid colored water.
That's going to be a more seasonal deal for me, more so than water clarity. Early in the spring, I'll try to use a real translucent, real natural minnow pattern. And then once the water temp gets warmed up, there's a color called Bud. It's basically a white back and sides with a chartreuse belly. That's my favorite. Once the water gets warm, they can see it from a long ways off. I don't know, something about that chartreuse belly and smallmouth, they just like it.
Really, any kind of bass and chartreuse, a little bit of chartreuse, they seem to really like it, especially when they're orientated out a little deeper, but definitely on smallmouth. We're going to take one more question. Before we do that, again, please check out our webinar. Please keep on the 29th, locating hard bottom, June 29th. Check out our Facebook and our social media sites and stuff to get the link. And we really do appreciate everybody who tuned in, all the great questions. We'll get to social media this week sometime with our prize winners. And again, we'll have another drawing or another prize package for people on the next one. Last question going out. And one more thing real quick, sorry. Please continue with the questions. Send them to us, email us. We couldn't get to them all today. And we'd like to get to everybody. So if you come across us, even in the recorded version on YouTube, and you want to ask us something to further the education process, by all means, please send us the question. Is there a magic speed when using side imaging? For me, there is. Well, one, I can't get too fast, as I'm going to lose it anyway. But I may push that every now and then. If I'm on a big flat, I'm just trying to find something out there, I may try to push it over 5 mile an hour, 7, 8, whatever I can do before I lose it. As long as you're going in a straight line, you'll still have it. I really like the 3 to 5 mile per hour, and a lot of it goes with what the wind's doing and stuff like that. The slower you go, the little more accuracies that you'll find and stuff like that. Sometimes even the simple boat drift will really pick all them out, show you how big them boulders are. Faster going, more compact everything's going to look. So I would say 3 to 5 miles per hour. Should I touch on that at all?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm not real familiar with Lowrance's, but hummingbirds, basically you want to set your scroll speed to the mile an hour. It's on a scale of 1 to 10. You want to set that to the speed you're going. So if I want to go 5, 6 miles an hour, I got to set my scroll speed at 5 or 6. If I'm going 2, 3 mile an hour, I want to set my scroll speed at 2 or 3.
Right on. And that's it. That's it for right now. We really, really thank everybody for coming and checking out our webinar. It's our second one. We have many, many more coming. Again, June 29th, locating hard bottom.
Yep. Thanks a lot for tuning in and for the questions, and hopefully you'll tune in again on the 29th.
And between that now and then, a lot of tight lines. See you later.
Thanks, guys.